Hello and welcome to another video from the Tradelands Nation. This is our monthly world report, closing out the month of June and bringing us into the second half of the year. We are going to do a deep dive into the state of the economy in this video, starting with the stock exchange. The MNG 15 ends the first half of the year at 23,028, losing 725 points in June and a loss of 5,000 points since January 1st. The drop is a sign that not much is really changing on the mining front. Many of the tried and true objects that drive players to move into this profession are still here, and not a whole lot has been adding value to this market in 2023. Arguably, the biggest change has happened only in the last month, with the importance of onyx and silver in timber felling making a small blip in the otherwise downward trend. Silver has shown a strong likelihood of becoming a staple axe, but onyx is overpriced, and the market is showing clear signs that buyers will not be willing to purchase this item until something changes. On the other hand, the JSI index, which measures the relative value from timber felling, has seen an increase to the tune of 8.25%, closing at 16,693. The last time the market saw this kind of strength was back in July of 2022. Around the same time when the last big batch of new wood types were added to the market. But this time, the addition of new woods to the drop tables created a strong upward momentum in its value. The volatile ups and downs are an indicator that the final price point is not yet set for these new wood types, mainly due to the fact that creating the axes needed to obtain these materials is currently more expensive than the wood that you obtain from them, which will likely cause fluctuations in the future until an equilibrium point is reached when both mining and timber felling can be considered profitable. But the most telling story of the economic state is the earnings index. For those who are unfamiliar with this index, it measures the value of items that are obtained from the premium merchant and then resold to other players. It includes the value of items that are available year-round from the premium merchant, as well as those which are sold for a limited time, such as crate items. And of course, there are vouchers and tokens. The market ends at 48,405, losing 8.5% in June, and is currently at the lowest point that it has been all year. The last time the market was lower was in November of 2022, just after the Halloween event and just before the start of the hype for the winter event. But it isn't all doom and gloom on this index. This index is arguably one of the most important market indexes because it can tell traders a lot about the current state and future state of the market. The long sloping trend that we see in June is a sign of a phenomenon known as market fatigue. This is when a market has become so exhausted that it loses its ability to become profitable. In the case of Tradelands, this coincides with the completion of the Burkeland auction. If you are a trader who likes to buy low and then sell those items high, when the earnings index is trending down like it is right now, it is usually a bad time to make these kinds of trades. Instead, wait until this index starts to rise again, which is a sign that the capitalization of this market is returning, and then you will be able to capitalize on the volatility that also results from it. But speaking of auctions, this year we saw north of 1.4 billion doubloons transacted during the Burkeland auction. For comparison, last year's Purshovian auction netted around 800 million in transactions. We will also point out that the publicly traded market, the one that the stock exchange represents, and it doesn't include those auctions, had a market strength of only 1.2 billion in the month of June, meaning that the market strength of the auction exceeded all player activity for the month. That means the auction is likely to be viewed as incredibly successful from the game developer's point of view, and more of them are likely to occur in the future. If the data available to the game developer indeed matches what our data is showing, then that means the next auction isn't likely to occur for at least another 4 months, with the caveat that the continuation of these micro-releases could end up changing this data as we progress into July and August. We will cap off our economic coverage with a review of one of these changes that occurred during a release, and that is Blood Oak. This item was removed from the market, but so far it doesn't seem like players are in a hurry to effect a price change just yet. There are a few players who have attempted to raise the price to 1,000 per piece, but the overall price point so far has only risen by about 200 points, likely an indicator that people who bought the wood previously aren't seeing a need to raise their prices. But the capitalization of blood oak is dropping, and that's usually the primer for our future price correction. If we compare the price of blood oak when it was on sale to other similarly priced premium woods, those being ponewood and lemonwood, we can deduce that the likely price point sellers will strive for in the future will end up somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 per piece. That makes the price point of 1,000 per piece a bit more palatable, if you are playing the long game, of course. And now we move into the politics of Tradelands. The war between the Alliance and Purshovia continues. Following the defeat in the waters near Salem, the force of Purshovia retreated back to Harrisburg, while the 1st Division of Burkeland moved back home for repairs and rearmament. Purshovia had already sent a relief division to the Grand Isles that was expected to arrive in June. Their mission was to establish a supply line to Harrisburg, fortifying their position and cutting off Burkeland from the rest of the Allied forces. Purshovia arrived at Clydesdale to find the fortress manned, but no real resistance in the form of an Allied fleet. They opted to blockade the fortress island rather than occupy it. The commanders instead focused their attention on completing their primary mission of linking up their supply lines and pushing Burkeland's patrol zone north of Fort Verner. This allowed coal supplies to reach the entire fleet, free of any attempt at interception by the Burkeland marauders. The Allies, taken aback by the sudden emergence of a fresh fleet from Purshovia, hastily organized a counterattack against the blockade. The Allied strategy was straightforward. A resupply squadron, led by the Novobalrescan Navy, would attempt a direct landing, while a screening force controlled by Whitecrest would attempt a delaying action, hopefully drawing out the Purshovians away from the island for the duration of the mission. The Allies were under no false pretenses. The battle would be costly, with casualties expected to be upward of 80% of their resupply force. The Purshovian strategy was based around this new, as of yet classified, hardware that it brought with them into the Grand Isles. Expecting an Allied assault directly on their main fleet, as the Allied forces have done in the past, they formed up into 2 groups, with a screening force of expendable ships to protect their artillery ships from direct attack. As the roar of the Purshovians' newest weapon rumbled across the sea, the Allied battle plan fell apart, even before it started. The fleet immediately changed tactics, aware that they would not survive long enough to bait the Purshovians away from Clydesdale, immediately ordered their relief force to beach their ships near the island and offload whatever they could. One by one, the Allied forces were picked off, but they managed to get within swimming distance of the fort. Through the chaos and a moment of pride for the shipwrights of Fenwick, the Retaliator, which came with this group, withstood several direct hits from this new superweapon. Despite taking on water, it continued to fight, but inevitably the naval force was obliterated. But they had done their job, for the only ship to survive would be one of the supply ships, who had successfully offloaded its cargo during the chaos, including its most precious gift to the defenders of Clydesdale, none other than Chancellor Lawston, who would go on later to lead the defense of the island itself. Purshovia had won a short-term victory, but as long as the garrison remained on Clydesdale, all of Purshovia's movements were being observed, feeding valuable intelligence to the Allied forces, meaning Purshovia would have to deal with them at some point if they wished to truly dominate the region and win the war. But at this moment, another lucky break occurred for Purshovia, this time in the form of an insurgency. The pirates of Black Wind Cove took the opportunity to try and reacquire lost territory, and launched an invasion of Cannoneer's Key. This put the Allied forces in a difficult position, and King Zach was forced to depart Salem in order to take command of the garrison and prepare the defenses. When he arrived, he found himself in a desperate situation. Most of the former garrison had been transferred off the island, and were now locked behind the blockade at Clydesdale. The infrastructure was depleted, shore batteries moved onto ships that were now either at the bottom of the sea or stuck behind enemy lines. The Pirate King, having heard the same rumors of poor defenses on the island, moved in for the kill. But to his surprise, as he approached the island, mortar fire erupted from the island as he drew near. This was no easy fight. His fleet and his captains were not here to become martyrs, and instead they quickly buckled and began a hasty retreat. The Pirate King himself is rumored to have mumbled to himself in frustration how he had done everything right, and somehow he was still not able to win. But the shock of King Zack's daring strategy had done its job, and Whitecrest would win the day. But where the pirates can attempt to capitalize on a situation, so too can the Purshovians. Realizing that the fleet had been moved south and was not able to interfere with any of their operations in the north, this was the opportunity that they needed to invade Clydesdale and secure their position in the Grand Isles once and for all. But this time luck was on the side of the Allies. In the hours before the amphibious assault, Chancellor Lostic would present a document showing the entire battle plan of Purshovia. The Purshovians would conduct 2 separate landings, while performing anti-battery fire against the fort defenses. After securing the town, they would move up against the shore battery, then up to the fortress and wipe out the defenders one by one. To defend against this, artillery rotations were put in place to provide fire support. The Chancellor would perform a flanking movement on the west side of the island, while the bulk of the defenders would hold the outer fort for as long as possible. Once again, Purshovia brought one of its new weapons of destruction, which rained hellfire down on the defenders with abandon. The landings occurred like clockwork. Fighting in the main street of town was intense, but ultimately it favored Purshovia. While the town would fall, the fortress, still under heavy bombardment, was holding back its attackers, while Chancellor Lostic held the right flank. After another intense push into the outer fortress, the defenders were finally overrun. Chancellor Lostic saw this and finally abandoned his position, making a fighting retreat into the fortress itself. And here the Purshovians, now exhausted having fought so hard to make up what little ground they had already, could not muster enough strength to go further. The fortress of Clydesdale would remain in Allied hands. With this victory, Purshovia's hopes of achieving a favorable end to the war was over. They may be able to try again, but it was clear that the war would progress for yet another month. The Allies continued to drain what little resources they still had, and yet there was still another force at play. As the last Purshovian soldier retreated from the island, one soldier, seen here in this single photograph, taken moments before he would ultimately leave the fleet, who we will only know by his ID tag 50017, to seek answers to the most important question: how had it come to this? Purshovia was once the protector of the Grand Isles, guaranteeing the freedom of the islands from oppressors like Burkeland. After all, the Bluecoats were known to be thieves, stealing from other nations and trying to turn a profit. Even last month, a group of Burkelanders were caught stealing the Carrot Clad, a sacred artifact of the Alki people, presumably to be sold on the black market. And yet the nations of the Grand Isles, the ones Purshovia swore to protect, were now their enemy. So this soldier knew something more sinister must be at work. As he left on his own journey for answers, he would later emerge, having found something. His first stop was to the Wizards of Whitecrest, but they were so enamored with their search for the Obsidian Tower that he found no help there. So he turned to the next most likely place to receive assistance, the King of Blackwind Cove. Here he presented what may be the most important plot against Tradelands. in an attempt to enslave all the people under their new master. The king realized the importance of what this elusive captain had uncovered and immediately passed this information on to his network of bounty hunters to give the players a chance to take a new mission to save Tradelands from this unwanted fate. Even though he gave us all a fighting chance against this new unknown threat, who was behind this attempt to enslave the Grand Isles? Is it some sinister plot from bad actors in Purshovia? Or was it perhaps Nova Balreska, who had brokered the deal that ultimately brought the Alliance together? Or perhaps it is a plot by one of the new and largely unknown nations that have recently emerged in the political sphere and are trying to eliminate Purshovia from potentially stopping them. While we may not know, the one man who found the truth behind this devious plot may be the one person who does. If only we knew who this former war hero is, this dark knight who may have given Tradelands a fighting chance to avoid this unwanted fate. Maybe you will be the one who can find him and determine if his intentions are altruistic or if he is simply seeking to profit from this information, like so many others before him. That will do it for today's broadcast. As always, thank you all for watching, and happy trading, everyone.